I never thought my marriage would end with me finding a folder labeled Amanda Financial Assets hidden in my mother-in-law's desk. But here we are. Let me take you back to when everything seemed perfect on the surface. My name is Amanda Mitchell, and for 5 years I thought I was living the American dream. At 32, I had built a successful career as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Denver. My husband, David, and I owned a beautiful 2-story house in the suburbs, complete with the white picket fence and everything. From the outside, we looked like the couple everyone envied at neighborhood barbecues. But cracks have a way of showing up in even the most carefully maintained facades. It started with small things that I initially brushed off as quirks or stress from David's demanding job at the insurance company. He began spending more evenings at his mother Patricia's house, claiming she needed help with yard work or computer issues. These visits went from once a week to 3 or 4 times, often lasting until well past dinner time. "Mom's just getting older, babe," David would explain when I mentioned feeling like we barely saw each other anymore. "She relies on me since Dad passed." The phone calls were another red flag I chose to ignore. David would step outside to take certain calls, always claiming it was work-related or boring family stuff that would just stress me out. When I'd walk into a room while he was on these calls, he'd quickly wrap them up with a casual, "Hey, I'll call you back later." But it was Patricia's sudden interest in our finances that should have set off every alarm bell in my head. During family dinners, she'd casually slip in questions about my salary, our mortgage payments, or whether we had joint bank accounts. When I'd answer honestly, thinking she was just making conversation, David would give me these looks across the table that I couldn't quite decode. "Amanda makes good money," Patricia would say with what I thought was pride. "You two must be building quite the nest egg." The gaslighting was so subtle that I didn't recognize it for what it was. When I mentioned feeling uncomfortable about her financial questions, David would shake his head with that patient smile he'd perfected. "Honey, you're being too sensitive. Mom's just interested in our lives. She wants to make sure we're secure." He'd pull me close and kiss my forehead. "Besides, she helped us with the down payment, remember? She has a right to be curious about how we're doing." Looking back, I can see how carefully orchestrated it all was. The way Patricia would comment on expensive purchases I'd make for myself, always with a concerned tone. "Oh, Amanda, that's a beautiful purse, but wasn't it terribly expensive?" Or how she'd praise David for being so responsible with money, while implying I was the spendthrift in the relationship. The isolation happened gradually, too. David would suggest we skip dinner with my college friends because they're all single and just want to party. He'd convince me that my sister was too dramatic and that her advice about relationships came from a place of jealousy. Slowly but surely, my support network shrank until it was just David, his family, and work colleagues who barely knew my personal life. I started noticing other things that made my stomach clench with an anxiety I couldn't name. David would quickly close his laptop when I walked into the room. He'd delete his browsing history daily, claiming it was a security habit from work. When mail arrived addressed to both of us, he'd sort through it first, often taking certain pieces to file properly before I could see them. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late October. I was working late, trying to close the books for month end, when I decided to surprise David by coming home early with his favorite Thai food. The house was dark except for the glow from his computer in the home office. I crept up quietly, planning to surprise him, but froze when I saw what was on his screen. Browser tabs for How to File for Divorce Quietly, Protecting Assets During Separation, and Colorado divorce laws for high-earning spouses. My blood turned to ice as I watched him bookmark a page titled Strategies for Claiming Spouse's 401k. David was so absorbed in his research that he didn't hear me approach. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds, watching my husband of 5 years researching how to leave me while maximizing his financial gain. The Thai food slipped from my hands, containers hitting the hardwood floor with a crash that finally made him spin around. The look of absolute panic on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a moment of marital doubt or idle curiosity. This was planning. "Amanda, you're home early!" He slammed the laptop shut so hard I was surprised it didn't break. "I was just work stuff." research for a client's divorce case. David didn't handle divorce cases. He sold life insurance. That night, lying in bed next to a man who was actively planning to leave me, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to cry or beg or try to save a marriage that was already over in his mind. Instead, I was going to start paying attention, really paying attention, to everything that had been happening around me. I began keeping a journal, documenting every suspicious phone call, every unexplained absence, every time Patricia asked probing questions about our finances. I started taking screenshots of David's computer when he left it open, photographing any documents he left lying around, and most importantly, I began protecting myself financially. The gaslighting became clearer once I knew what to look for. When I mentioned feeling disconnected from him, David would turn it around on me. "You've been so stressed with work lately. Maybe you should talk to someone about your anxiety." When I asked about his frequent visits to his mother's house, he'd sigh heavily and say, "I thought you liked that I was close to my family. Now you want to come between us?" The manipulation was masterful, I'll give him that. He made me question my own perceptions while simultaneously gathering intelligence about our shared assets. Every time I brought up feeling insecure about our relationship, he'd reassure me with just enough affection to keep me from digging deeper, while never actually addressing my concerns. I started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with, carefully testing the waters to see if they'd noticed changes in my behavior or relationship. My college roommate, Sarah, was the first to confirm what I'd suspected. "Amanda, I've been worried about you for months," she admitted over coffee. "You used to be so confident and outspoken. Lately, you second-guess everything you say and constantly apologize for having opinions." Her words hit me like a slap. I had been apologizing constantly, for wanting to spend money on things I enjoyed, for having feelings about David's behavior, for existing as a full person with needs and wants instead of just being the perfect, agreeable wife he apparently required while planning his exit strategy. The financial tracking became an obsession. I discovered that David had been transferring small amounts from our joint savings account to an individual account I didn't know existed. When I questioned him about the transfers, he had explanations ready. Emergency fund for his mother, money set aside for my birthday surprise, investment opportunities that were too complicated to explain. I consulted with a lawyer without David's knowledge, using my maiden name and paying in cash. The attorney, a sharp woman named Helen Rodriguez, listened to my story with the kind of attention that told me she'd heard variations of it many times before. "You're doing exactly the right thing by documenting everything," she told me. "In cases like this, the spouse who's planning usually has a significant head start. The fact that you've figured it out and are being proactive puts you in a much better position." Helen helped me understand my rights and options, but more importantly, she validated what I'd been feeling. This wasn't normal marital problems or communication issues. This was strategic deception with a financial motive. I opened my own checking account at a different bank, slowly transferring money from our joint account in amounts small enough not to trigger David's attention. I made copies of all our important financial documents, storing them in a safety deposit box he didn't know about. I even installed a discreet recording app on my phone for conversations with David and Patricia. The hardest part was maintaining the facade of normalcy. Every morning, I had to wake up next to someone who was actively plotting against me and pretend to be the loving, trusting wife he expected. I had to smile at Patricia during family dinners while she pumped me for information she was probably reporting back to David. I had to act interested when David talked about our future together, knowing he was planning a future without me. But something interesting happened during this period of forced performance. I started to remember who I was before David's subtle control took hold. The confident woman who'd graduated magna cum laude, who'd built her career through competence and hard work, who'd once been known for her quick wit and strong opinions. That woman had been buried under years of being told she was too sensitive or overthinking things, but she was still there, waiting. I began recognizing patterns I'd missed before. How David would withdraw affection when I expressed any independence, then shower me with attention when I backed down. How conversations about my career advancement would somehow turn into discussions about how demanding my job was and whether I might be happier in a less stressful position. how my successes were minimized while my mistakes were highlighted and remembered. The psychological profile I was building of David and Patricia became clearer each day. They were methodical planners who valued financial security above all else. Patricia had raised David to see relationships as transactions and marriages as business partnerships that should be dissolved when they were no longer profitable. They respected power and preparation, which meant my emotional approach would never work with them. I realized they were counting on me being the stereotypical blindsided wife, emotional, reactive, and unprepared. They expected tears and pleading, not strategy and documentation. This was their critical miscalculation. During this period, I also discovered I wasn't David's first wife. Through some careful social media investigation, I found records of a previous marriage that had ended in divorce 8 years ago. His first wife, Michelle, had been left with significant debt and no access to assets they'd built together. The divorce decree was public record, and it showed a pattern of financial maneuvering that looked very similar to what I was experiencing. The most chilling discovery was that Patricia had been involved in that divorce too, providing testimony about David's financial contributions to the marriage while minimizing Michelle's role. It was like finding a playbook for exactly what they were planning to do to me. I reached out to Michelle through LinkedIn, crafting a careful message that didn't reveal too much but opened the door for conversation. Her response was swift and filled with warnings I wished I'd received years earlier. "He's charming and patient at first," she wrote, "but everything is calculated. Patricia keeps detailed records of everything you earn, spend, and own. They'll use your own success against you in court, claiming you don't need spousal support because you're capable of supporting yourself." Michelle's insights filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed. The frequent visits to Patricia's house weren't just for planning. They were for document review. Patricia was essentially serving as David's unpaid private investigator, building a case against me using information I'd freely shared during family conversations. But knowledge is power, and I was accumulating both at an exponential rate. Every day that David thought he was successfully deceiving me was another day I gained ground in preparing for the war I now knew was coming. The waiting was excruciating, but I understood it was necessary. Confronting David prematurely would only put him on guard and potentially accelerate his timeline. Instead, I had to let him continue believing he was in control while I built an unshakable foundation for my own protection. I practiced emotional control like it was a martial art. When David would come home late from helping Mom, I'd greet him with a smile instead of questions. When Patricia would make her pointed comments about my spending, I'd nod thoughtfully instead of getting defensive. I became the wife they expected while secretly becoming someone else entirely, someone they weren't prepared to face. 3 months into my investigation, I felt ready for whatever they were planning. I had evidence, legal counsel, financial independence, and most importantly, I had clarity about who I was dealing with. The scared, confused woman who'd found those browser tabs was gone, replaced by someone who understood the game and was prepared to win it. I just didn't know that the final revelation, the one that would change everything, was still waiting for me in a manila folder with my name on it. The moment that shattered my world came on a Thursday afternoon in December. I had left work early for a dentist appointment that got canceled, so I decided to surprise David with an early dinner together. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed his car wasn't there, which was odd since he'd told me that morning he'd be working from home. Walking into our house, the first thing I saw were 2 large suitcases by the front door. They were packed and zipped, with David's leather jacket draped over the handle of one. My heart stopped. After months of investigation and preparation, the moment I'd been dreading and expecting had finally arrived. But David wasn't there. The house felt different, emptier somehow, as if it had already been abandoned. I walked through the rooms in a daze, noticing small things missing. His favorite coffee mug was gone from the kitchen. The photo of us from our honeymoon was no longer on his nightstand. His expensive cologne had been cleared from the bathroom counter. This was it. He was leaving, and he'd planned to do it while I was at work like a coward. I should have called Helen immediately, should have started executing the plan we'd discussed for this exact scenario. Instead, I found myself drawn to David's home office, looking for any final pieces of evidence I could gather. His desk had been cleared of most personal items, but the drawers were still full. That's when I found it. Tucked in the back of his bottom desk drawer, behind old warranty information and instruction manuals, was a manila folder that made my blood run cold. Written in Patricia's precise handwriting across the tab was, "Amanda Financial Assets, Detailed Analysis." My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were photocopies of documents I never knew Patricia had access to. My pay stubs, my 401k statements, my individual savings account information, even my student loan payment history. There were printouts of my credit report and a detailed spreadsheet breaking down my annual earnings for the past 3 years. But that wasn't the worst part. Clipped to the inside cover was a handwritten timeline in Patricia's writing that detailed my work schedule, my spending patterns, and even my menstrual cycle. She'd been tracking me like a research subject, noting when I was most likely to be emotional or distracted. There were observations about my relationship with my family, my friends, and my habits that were so detailed and clinical it made me feel sick. The final section was titled Divorce Strategy, and it outlined a step-by-step plan that was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. They planned to frame the divorce as my fault by documenting my excessive spending and career obsession. They had screenshots of my social media posts that could be taken out of context to paint me as materialistic and self-centered. They'd even planned to claim I was having an emotional affair with my male colleague Marcus, based on nothing more than friendly conversations they'd somehow monitored. The financial strategy was the most devastating part. They intended to argue that because I out-earned David, I should be responsible for alimony payments to him. They planned to claim that his lower salary was due to sacrifices he'd made to support my career, and that he deserved compensation for being the supportive spouse. At the bottom of the folder was a note in David's handwriting that made me see red. Amanda's too trusting and emotional to see this coming. By the time she figures out what's happening, we'll have everything documented and she'll be scrambling to catch up. She'll probably just accept whatever we offer to avoid conflict. I stood in that office, holding proof of the most elaborate betrayal I could have imagined, and something inside me shifted permanently. The scared, confused woman who'd been playing detective for months disappeared entirely. In her place was someone David and Patricia had never met, someone who was about to show them exactly how wrong they'd been about everything. I photographed every single page of that folder with my phone, uploaded the images to 3 different cloud storage accounts, and emailed copies to Helen. Then I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it because I wanted them to think their secret was still safe. Next, I moved with a precision that surprised even me. I went to our bedroom and opened the safe where we kept important documents. Using the combination David thought only he knew, but which I'd memorized months ago, I removed my original birth certificate, social security card, and passport. I took photos of all the documents inside, including ones I wasn't legally entitled to take. I called our bank and, using security questions I was authorized to answer, put an immediate freeze on all our joint accounts, citing suspected fraudulent activity. The representative was helpful and concerned, especially when I mentioned finding unauthorized access to my personal financial information. "Mrs. Mitchell, we'll need you to come in tomorrow to file formal reports, but the freeze is effective immediately. No withdrawals, transfers, or automatic payments will process until you and your husband both appear in person with proper identification." Helen answered her phone on the second ring. "Amanda, what's happened?" "They're moving today. I found their entire strategy documented in a folder." "Helen, it's worse than we thought. They've been planning this for over a year, maybe longer. They have financial information they shouldn't have access to, and they're planning to frame me as the villain." "Where are you now?" "At home. David's gone, but his suitcases are here. I think he's coming back to get them tonight, probably expecting to leave me a note and disappear like a coward." "Listen to me carefully." Helen's voice was sharp with focus. "Take photos of everything, the packed suitcases, the empty spaces where his things were, everything. Then get out of that house. Come to my office right now. We're going to file emergency motions today that will change this entire situation." I followed her instructions, documenting everything with the methodical thoroughness that David had apparently underestimated. I took photos of the suitcases, the missing items, even the absence of his toiletries in the bathroom. Every image was time-stamped proof of his planned abandonment. But I had one more stop to make before leaving. Patricia lived 15 minutes away in the house where David had grown up. I'd been there dozens of times for family dinners and holidays, always playing the role of the grateful daughter-in-law. Today, I was going as someone else entirely. I parked across the street and waited. Sure enough, David's car was in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see him and Patricia sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread between them, probably going over their final strategy. I didn't approach the house. Instead, I called Patricia's landline from my cell phone. "Hello, Patricia. It's Amanda. I'm sorry to bother you, but I just got home and found David's suitcases packed by the door. I'm so confused and scared. Is he there? Can I talk to him?" The silence on the other end was deafening. I could picture them looking at each other, probably panicking about their timeline being disrupted. "Oh, honey," Patricia's voice was syrupy with false concern. "David is here, but he's very upset. He said you two had a terrible fight this morning." I had to admire the quick thinking, even as it disgusted me. They were going to claim I'd done something to justify his leaving. "A fight? Patricia, I have no idea what you're talking about. We had coffee together this morning and everything was fine. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd see me tonight. I'm so confused. Please, can I just talk to him?" "Honey, I think maybe you should give him some space tonight. Sometimes when people are emotional, they don't remember conversations clearly. Why don't you call tomorrow when everyone's calmed down?" The gaslighting was happening in real time, exactly as I'd expected, but this time, I was recording it. "Patricia, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, dropping the scared wife act entirely. "I found the folder, the one with my name on it in David's desk. I've seen your timeline, your strategy, your entire plan." The silence that followed was different. It was the sound of someone's world imploding. "I know about Michelle, David's first wife. I know this isn't your first time doing this, and I know you both think I'm too emotional and trusting to fight back effectively." I could hear urgent whispering in the background. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "David can come home tonight and face this like an adult, or he can stay hidden at Mommy's house while I destroy both of you in court. Your choice." I hung up before she could respond. 20 minutes later, I was in Helen's office, and she was reading through the photos of Patricia's folder with an expression of pure fury. "Amanda, this is beyond unethical. Some of this information was obtained illegally. The credit report monitoring, the workplace surveillance, this could result in criminal charges against them. What do we do?" "We go nuclear. Emergency hearing tomorrow morning. I'm requesting immediate asset protection, dissolution of marriage with cause, and a restraining order against both David and Patricia. We're also filing a criminal complaint for financial identity theft and stalking." Helen worked through the evening, preparing motions that would essentially freeze David and Patricia out of everything they'd planned to take from me. By the time we finished, it was past 8 o'clock. "Go to a hotel tonight," Helen advised. "Don't go home. Let David find empty suitcases and no wife. Let him and Patricia panic about where you are and what you're doing." I checked into a hotel downtown and ordered room service, the most expensive item on the menu, charged to the credit card that would be evidence of my excessive spending in their divorce filing. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 9:17 p.m., my phone started ringing. David. I let it go to voicemail. Then Patricia called. Voicemail, then David again. By midnight, I had 14 missed calls and 23 text messages ranging from concerned, "Baby, where are you? I came home and you're not here," to manipulative, "Mom is worried sick about you. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it," to desperate, "Amanda, please call me back. I love you and I don't understand what's happening." I didn't respond to any of them. The next morning, Helen and I walked into court with a legal arsenal that left David's hastily hired attorney scrambling. David looked like he hadn't slept, sitting next to Patricia, who was clutching her purse like it contained state secrets. When Helen presented the folder contents to the judge, along with the recorded phone conversation and timeline of David's planned abandonment, the courtroom went silent. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at David and Patricia with unconcealed disgust. Mr. Mitchell, I've been presiding over divorce cases for 20 years, and I have never seen such calculated deception presented as evidence. Mrs. Mitchell, she turned to me, you're granted emergency protection of all assets pending full investigation. Mr. Mitchell, you're ordered to return to the marital home only with a police escort to collect personal items. Any further contact with Mrs. Mitchell must go through attorneys. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible criminal charges related to identity theft and stalking. Mrs. Patricia Mitchell, you're named as a co-respondent in these proceedings. I watched David's face crumble as he realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't the quiet, profitable divorce he'd planned. This was public exposure, criminal investigation, and complete loss of control. Over the following weeks, the case gained local media attention when the criminal charges were filed. The story of a mother and son conspiring to defraud a wife became a cautionary tale that was shared across social media. Patricia's detailed surveillance folder became evidence in a criminal trial that resulted in both of them receiving probation and significant financial penalties. The civil divorce was finalized 6 months later. David received nothing beyond his personal belongings and half the value of his car. I kept the house, my retirement accounts, and my dignity. More importantly, I kept the life I'd built for myself before I met him. Michelle, David's first wife, reached out after seeing the news coverage. She thanked me for exposing their pattern and preventing them from victimizing someone else. We became friends, bonded by the shared experience of escaping the same trap. Patricia's reputation in their small social circle was destroyed. The woman who'd prided herself on being a respectable pillar of the community became known as someone who'd helped her son steal from his wife. She moved to another state 6 months after the trial. David tried to contact me several times over the first year, always with some variation of the same message. He was sorry. He'd made a mistake. His mother had manipulated him, and he wanted another chance. I never responded. There was nothing left to say to someone who'd spent years planning to betray me while I loved him. 2 years later, I moved to a different city for a promotion that doubled my salary. I bought a smaller house that was entirely mine, filled it with furniture I chose, and painted the walls colors that made me happy. I dated occasionally, but I was in no rush to remarry. I'd learned the difference between partnership and exploitation, and I wasn't willing to settle for anything less than genuine equality. The woman who'd once apologized for having opinions had become someone who spoke up confidently in meetings, negotiated aggressively for raises, and never again tolerated being made to feel like her perceptions were wrong. The experience had burned away all the parts of me that were willing to be diminished for someone else's comfort. Sometimes people ask if I regret the marriage or feel bitter about the lost years. The truth is, I'm grateful for what happened, as painful as it was. I learned that I'm capable of far more strength and strategic thinking than I'd ever imagined. I learned to trust my instincts and value my own judgment above someone else's manipulation. Most importantly, I learned that love without respect is just elaborate control, and that the right person will never ask you to become smaller to make them feel bigger. David had been wrong about everything, but especially about one thing. I wasn't too emotional to see it coming. I was exactly emotional enough to make sure it never happened again.